So this video that you're about to see right here definitely surprised me because when you think of One America News or Newsmax, they're both to the right of Fox News, and they're basically a hug box. Everybody sits around and jacks each other off about how right they are in their far right opinions, and there is no, there really isn't any dissent that's allowed on air, at least to this point that I've seen. Well, it looks like that just changed. So here's a Newsmax panel, and they're talking about the killing of Jordan Neely by Daniel Penny. This is, of course, the homeless, psychologically disturbed man who was on the subway, and he was acting in perhaps a threatening manner, and then you had a former Marine who basically choked him out for 15 minutes and killed him. Well, they're going to have the conversation. Most of the people on the panel have the opinion that you would think a Newsmax person would have, right? But there's one guy by the name of Jason Nichols, who is the sole voice of dissent, and man, he pounds away at him. Let's watch.
Yeah, Chris, today 24-year-old Marine veteran Daniel Penny is the man accused of killing Jordan Neely. He surrendered himself to law enforcement. That is after radical Manhattan's Soros-funded district attorney Alvin Bragg charged Penny with second-degree manslaughter, a charge that carries a 3 to 15-year prison sentence.
Let me just say, this is something that the right is so good at. You heard the way she described Alvin Bragg, radical Soros-funded DA. Like, they're so good at poisoning the well and using loaded terms and saying them over and over and over until even people who don't agree with them, like if you think of Alvin Bragg, you might pop in your head like, yeah, radical Soros-funded DA, right? They're so good at that. I'm so jealous. The left needs to get so much better at that. I try to be good at that, be good at the framing, be good at the messaging, but God, the right is like, they're like Pavlovian in their response. They come up, think about how Trump did it with Crooked Hillary, right? Crooked Hillary, lying Ted. And he does it so much and so often that eventually, even if you're not a Trump fan, if you heard Hillary Clinton, you would think, oh, Crooked Hillary, Sleepy Joe, right? Like, they're just good at labeling stuff. Now, in this case, the connection is so tenuous, man. It's like George Soros had donated to a group which donated a tiny amount to Alvin Bragg, but the specifics be damned. No, it's radical Soros-funded DA Alvin Bragg. So anyway, that's just a random side point to appreciate just how good they are at this like marketing game that's played in politics. And the left is nowhere near as good at it.
Manslaughter, a charge that carries a 3 to 15-year prison sentence. Mind you, this is the man who saved a subway of riders from being harassed by an erratic homeless man with 42 prior arrests, including subway attacks. Daniel Penny was taken into custody the day of the incident and released without charges. Only after liberal activists descended upon the streets of New York over the past week did this charge come 11 days later. Now, not only does this seem politically motivated, but is this the beginning of the end of the Good Samaritan? It certainly seems that way in Bragg's New York City. He goes after former President Trump. He's focused on that. But the people that are out there either defending themselves from violent crime or defending others are now...
There was no violent crime.
He was threatening people.
No, but there was no violent crime. He didn't attack anyone.
He was threatening to attack people.
Again,
he was threatening to attack.
Violent crime means somebody was attacked. Nobody was attacked. If someone looks at me wrong or screams at me, should I kill them? Should I choke them to death? Should I come up behind them and put them in a rear naked choke?
Probably, if he's threatening to murder people on a subway train.
He did not threaten.
He did threaten to kill people.
He said he was hungry.
He threatened to kill people.
I think you're omitting a couple of key elements.
Being mentally ill is not a crime.
Well, he wasn't.
Being hungry is not a crime.
Jason,
being homeless is not a crime.
No, threatening to murder
people. We absolutely have a mental health crisis. That's a fact.
We need to address the homeless
people on a subway train.
Absolutely.
I think Jason Nichols did a really good job there. They really opened the door for him because they basically said, like, he was doing a violent crime, and Jason Nichols was like, he wasn't doing a violent crime. The worst charge against him, and by the way, there are super contradictory reports from the people who were in the subway, but the worst charge against him is that he was making threats, which, by the way, is not acceptable, and if it's a direct threat of violence, it's illegal if it's a direct threat of violence, but even under the worst charge against him, he didn't physically assault anybody. And so they opened the door for Jason Nichols to be like, that's not what happened, right? Like, you're you're saying he was doing a violent crime. He wasn't doing a violent crime. In fact, at this point, arguably, the only violent crime that was committed, if they decide it's not self-defense, was what Daniel Penny did. So let me run that back one more time.
Days later. And not only does this seem politically motivated, but is this the beginning of the end of the Good Samaritan? It certainly seems that way in Bragg's New York City. I mean, he goes after former President Trump. He's focused on that. But the people that are out there either defending themselves from violent crime or defending others are now...
There was no violent crime.
He was threatening people.
No, but there was no violent crime. He didn't attack anyone.
He was threatening to attack people.
Again,
he was threatening to attack.
Violent crime means somebody was attacked. Nobody was attacked. If someone looks at me wrong or screams at me, should I kill them? Should I choke them to death? Should I come up behind them and put them in a rear naked choke?
Probably, if he's threatening to murder people on a subway train.
He did not threaten.
He did threaten to kill people.
He said he was hungry.
He threatened to kill people.
I think you're omitting a couple of key elements.
Being mentally ill is not a crime.
Well, he wasn't.
Being hungry is not a crime.
Jason,
being homeless is not a crime.
No, threatening to murder people.
We absolutely have a mental health crisis. That's a fact.
We need to address the homeless situation.
Absolutely.
It's so frightening to walk down the street and you have somebody who's either on something or severely mentally ill, and we're just supposed to look away and act like nothing's happening, or if somebody is getting right up in our face, ignore it. We're afraid.
Okay, so look, with this story, man, really what you have is a political Rorschach test, right? I mean, that's the conclusion I've come to after watching all the dialogue around this for a week now, is that it is a political Rorschach test. So what you have people on the right point out is, hey man, 42 prior arrests, and he punched a 67-year-old woman in the face. That's what people on the right are pointing out. People on the left are pointing out PTSD, severe depression, schizophrenia. Mom was choked out and murdered in 2007. Immediately after that, he lost it. He totally lost his mind. Before that, he had been a Michael Jackson impersonator on the subway, right? So here's somebody who's now homeless. The system failed them in roughly 17 different ways. And the video does show, the video that we have as of this moment does show, he was hungry, right? He was asking for food. So there's a narrative to be built from a left-wing perspective. There's a right-wing narrative to be built. They have witnesses on the subway who said, no, he was threatening people. Others say he wasn't threatening people. So what you have is a political Rorschach test. And everybody on the right is basically saying this was a clear case of self-defense. Daniel Penny is a hero. And everybody on the left is saying you basically murdered a guy in broad daylight because he choked him out for 15 minutes. Look, this is where I land on it. I mean, I've already talked about this a number of times before, but the way I look at it is like this. It's excessive. I mean, you can't... If he wasn't threatening anybody and those witnesses are correct, then honestly, even though he was acting erratic and weird, don't detain him, don't touch him. It'll blow over, right? But if he was directly threatening people, then honestly, I have no problem with them trying to detain him. But even if you try to detain him, you can't choke him out for 15 minutes until he dies. There were 3 people versus 1. There were 3 people, so 2 others along with Daniel Penny who were restraining him. I think he could have loosened up that chokehold enough where he doesn't die, right? Like, I think that you could have done that. So that's my overall takeaway. It's definitely excessive. If he didn't threaten anybody, don't touch him. If he did threaten people, which, by the way, he might have, right? We'll see when the whole video comes out, or hopefully it does come out at some point. I think the cops have a full video of the thing. We only have bits and pieces during the choking and then before it. But yeah, if he was threatening people, okay, you can detain him, but don't kill him, right? Don't put him in a chokehold for 15 minutes and then he ends up dying. It should be, you should have like a proportional reaction to the level of the threat. And, you know, I would argue that's over the line by definition. He didn't have any weapons on him, right? He was clearly undergoing some mental health episode. So I think once we get the full video, there will be more universal agreement on this. When I say more universal agreement, I mean like the normie perspective will sort of all fall within a certain spectrum of what's acceptable. You'll still have the hyper-partisans who, you know, narrativize based on their collection of information that fits their narrative in the case. But we'll see when hopefully the full video gets released. And my guess is the takeaway will be, even if he was a threat, even if he did violently threaten people or say violent things, you can detain him, but you can't choke him for 15 minutes until he dies, because that does cross the line. That does go too far. That did end up with somebody being killed. And it's just kind of ironic in a way, right? That the right likes to say we're so tough on violent crime. And it's like, well, here's a situation where you guys are actually making the excuses for the person who ended up doing the killing, right? Like, regardless of what you think of any of the characters involved, one person is dead and one person is responsible for that person's death. Directly so. So if you really are tough on violent crime, it's like, in a world that made sense, wouldn't you guys be saying, hey, there needs to be some consequences for this? If you care so much about law and order, this is not law and order. This is the opposite of law and order. And look, we've all had these experiences. If you've ever lived in a big city, certainly in modern day and age, we've all had these experiences where there's somebody who's psychologically off and they're homeless and there looks like there's an issue going on here. And they're threatening, mildly so or overtly so. And in 90% of cases, there's able to be de-escalation and people get out of it with nobody getting hurt in any way, shape, or form. And it's easy to say this from the sidelines and a Monday morning quarterback about the thing, but maybe this is part of that 10% where some sort of altercation couldn't have been, evaded, but it probably could have been, right? In like most of these situations, it probably could have been. I've told you guys my own stories with dealing with some menacing sort of situations where we found a way out and it was totally peaceful. So I think that Jason Nichols did a great job pushing back there. Listen, it's not easy. What was it, 3 versus 1? And he has to go out there and basically disagree with the herd mob mentality agreement where they're all on the same page. They all totally agree. And he's out there like, I don't know, you guys seem pretty damn certain that, like, well, this guy had to die. Even if you think he had to be detained, that might be fair based on the full video. Hopefully we'll see, right? But it still just crosses that line when you choke him for 15 minutes and he ends up dying. Clearly, there was some excessive force. Clearly, that was not a proportional reaction. And they just don't care. And look, I think the reason they don't care, if I'm being honest, is that you're talking about a homeless black guy, right? So they think it's like in their minds, they would never say this overtly, but I think in the back of their minds, it's like he's one of the quote unquote undesirables. He's homeless, he's black, and it's, and he was acting up. Hey, shouldn't have been acting up. Shouldn't have been having a mental health episode. Should have got your shit together. You shouldn't be homeless. Shouldn't be hungry. Like, it's sort of like, take care of it all yourself. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. But when we live in a system where there's, 600,000 homeless people or thereabouts, it's like, I hate to tell you guys, that's not 600,000 instances of individual moral failings. Unfortunately, there's a whole amalgamation of things that leads to that moment. Some of it could be individual moral failings, but in many cases, it's just a matter of like, you can't hold down a good job, raised in a shitty environment, got laid off, lost a family member in a tragedy. That literally happened with Jordan Neely in this particular case. Just a whole amalgamation of problems, and then we don't have mental health care available for people, regular health care available for people, drug rehab stuff available for people, therapy and, mental health experts available for people, just material well-being, economic well-being, a social safety net on that front. We don't have a great one in this country. So like all these things add up. Talk about falling through the cracks. Yeah, he fell through the cracks of society and the cracks are gaping, right? And so I think that's what the left tries to focus on is like, hey, if we fix the surrounding society, there wouldn't be so many Jordan Neelys. There'd be way fewer Jordan Neelys. And I think that's undeniably true. So anyway, again, good job, Jason Nichols, dealing with 3 people who vehemently disagree with him. I think he did a good job repping that position. And I like this guy. Maybe we'll try to get him on Crystal Kyle and Friends. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop. And watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.